This is the fastest gaming PC I have ever built. And I do not say that lightly. I have built a lot of systems over the years. I have tested a lot of hardware. I have sat in front of a lot of screens watching frame counters do things that made me genuinely excited. But nothing has felt like this. The moment I booted this machine for the first time and started pushing it, I had one of those rare moments where you realize the hardware in front of you has genuinely moved the needle in a way that actually matters. Not a marginal upgrade. Not a 10% bump that you have to squint at benchmark graphs to notice. A full generational leap that you feel immediately in every game, at every setting, every single time you sit down in front of it. This is that build. Let me show you everything. Before we get into the components, I want to set the scene properly because context matters here. For a long time, building the fastest possible gaming PC has involved a frustrating amount of compromise. You could have the fastest GPU on the market, but pair it with a processor that bottlenecked it in CPU-heavy games. You could have an incredible CPU that freed up every last frame the GPU could produce, but then the GPU itself was not actually fast enough to make that matter in the titles you actually play. Getting both sides of the equation right at the same time, at the absolute top of what is available, has historically been either extremely expensive, extremely difficult, or both. What has changed right now is that we are at a moment where the best gaming CPU available and the most powerful consumer GPU available are not just both exceptional individually, they are genuinely exceptional together. The bottleneck situation that has plagued high-end builds for years is less of a problem here than it has ever been, and the result of that is a system that performs in a way that previous top-end builds simply could not. So let us talk about the heart of this build. The processor is the one chip that serious gamers have been gravitating toward above everything else for gaming workloads. The architecture, the cache design, the way it handles the kinds of tasks that games actually throw at a CPU, it is genuinely purpose-built for gaming in a way that shows up clearly in real-world results rather than just synthetic benchmarks. Games that are notoriously CPU-hungry, games with massive open worlds, games with complex AI and physics simulations. This chip handles all of them with a composure that previous options could not match. Frame times are tight. Stuttering is minimal. The ceiling on what the GPU can actually do is pushed higher than it has been before, and that matters enormously when the GPU sitting next to it is as capable as this one. And the GPU is something else entirely. I have tested fast graphics cards before. I have benchmarked hardware that was considered monstrous at the time, and watched it age into something merely very good over a few years. But what sits in this build right now is in a different conversation. The raw performance numbers are extraordinary. But more than the numbers, it is the way it handles everything you throw at it. Cranking every setting to maximum in the most demanding titles available and watching the frame counter not just hold steady, but actively make the experience feel better than it has ever felt. That is what separates hardware that is technically impressive from hardware that actually changes how you experience games. This GPU does the latter, without question. The rest of the build is built to support those two components properly because there is no point in having the world's most powerful processor and GPU sitting on hardware that cannot feed them. The memory configuration is running at the optimal speed and latency profile for this platform, not the maximum that the specification sheet allows, but the combination that actually produces the best gaming performance in practice, which is not always the same thing. Storage is fast enough that load times are effectively irrelevant. You are in the game before you have finished reading the loading screen tip. The cooling solution keeps everything running at full speed under sustained load without the system ever having to pull back to protect itself, which is the kind of thing that matters enormously in long gaming sessions, but that you would never know was happening unless you were watching the monitoring software. The case is built for airflow rather than aesthetics, though it manages to look excellent at the same time. Temperatures across the whole system under full load are where you want them. Comfortable, stable, and leaving plenty of headroom for the hardware to do exactly what it is designed to do without thermal throttling ever entering the conversation. Cable management is clean. The build feels intentional. Every component choice was made to serve the performance goal rather than to tick boxes on a spec sheet. Now, let me talk about what this actually feels like to use, because that is ultimately what matters. The first game I loaded was one of the most demanding titles currently available, heavy on both CPU and GPU. The kind of game that exposes weaknesses in a system very quickly. Maximum settings, maximum resolution, no compromises. The performance was not just good, it was comfortable. The frame counter sat at a level that made the experience feel fluid and immediate in a way that cheaper hardware at lower settings simply cannot replicate. Because settings affect more than just resolution and shadow quality. They affect how the game world actually looks and feels to move through. And on this build, At those settings, it felt like the game was finally being presented the way it was designed to be experienced. Competitive multiplayer is where the CPU really shows what it can do. In titles where frame rate is directly tied to how well you perform, where the difference between seeing something a fraction of a second earlier and reacting to it can determine the outcome of an engagement, the ceiling this processor puts on the system is remarkable. The GPU is not waiting around for the CPU to catch up. The CPU is not being pushed past its limits trying to keep up with the GPU. They are working together at a level of synchronization that produces frame times so consistent and so tight that the experience feels almost unnaturally smooth compared to what most people are used to. Single-player games benefit in a different way. Open-world titles, games with complex simulation, anything that puts significant load on the processor, they all run with a stability and consistency that makes the experience of just playing the game better. No hitches when moving into a new area, no stutters when a lot of things happen at once on screen. Just a clean, stable, high-performance experience from the moment you load in to the moment you stop playing. That is not something you can take for granted, even at the top end of gaming hardware, which tells you something about how well matched these components are. Now, I want to be straightforward about something. This is an expensive build. The components sitting inside this case represent a significant investment, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise or dress it up as something universally accessible. If you are building on a budget, this is not the video that is going to help you squeeze the most out of a limited spend. But if you are someone who builds a high-end system every few years and wants to know whether this particular combination of components is worth committing to, the answer is yes. Clearly and unambiguously, yes. Because the gap between this and the previous generation is not the kind of incremental improvement that makes you wonder whether you should have waited another cycle. It is the kind of jump that makes everything you play feel better and makes you genuinely excited to sit down and game in a way that hardware upgrades do not always deliver on. The platform this build is on also gives you a runway. This is not a dead-end configuration that will be obsolete in a year. The socket, the memory support, the architecture, there is longevity here. You are not buying into something that will feel ancient the moment the next generation arrives. You are buying into a platform that will serve you well through the next several years of gaming, which is exactly what you want from a top-end build that costs serious money. If you are putting together a parts list right now and trying to decide whether this combination is the right call, it is. There is no other gaming CPU I would rather have paired with this GPU right now. There's no other GPU I would rather have in a gaming system at any price. Together, they form a build that does not ask you to accept compromises, does not leave performance on the table, and does not make you wonder what might have been if you had chosen differently. This is the build. The full parts list with every component, every link, and every detail about the configuration is down in the description. If you have questions about specific choices or want to know how to adapt this for a different budget or use case, drop them in the comments. And if you want to see more builds like this, more hardware deep dives, more real-world performance testing, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Let me also talk about something that does not always get enough attention in build videos, the actual process of putting this together. Because a build at this level is not just about picking the right components, it is about making sure those components are installed, configured, and tuned in a way that actually lets them perform the way they are capable of. Memory settings matter, cooling mount pressure matters, BIOS configuration matters. The difference between a system that is technically correct and a system that is actually optimized is not always visible in photos, but shows up very clearly in performance. Every setting in this build has been deliberately chosen. The memory is running the profile that testing showed produces the best gaming results on this platform, rather than just the fastest technically achievable configuration. The cooling is mounted with the correct thermal interface material applied properly, rather than just slapped on and hoped for the best. The BIOS has been gone through carefully to make sure nothing is being left on the table, and nothing is enabled that does not serve the gaming performance goal. That kind of attention to detail is what separates a good build from a great one. And this is a great one. Not because the components are expensive. Expensive components in a poorly configured system are just expensive components, but because everything has been set up to work together as well as it possibly can. The result is a machine that hits harder than a system with identical parts but less careful assembly and configuration would. And that is the part that most build videos skip over entirely because it is less visually exciting than unboxing components. But it is absolutely the part that makes the real difference when you are sitting down to actually play something. And one final thing worth saying clearly. When people ask me what the best gaming PC configuration looks like right now, not the most balanced, not the best value, not the most sensible, but the outright best gaming PC you can build today, the answer is exactly what you are looking at in this video. This combination of processor and GPU represents the current peak of what consumer gaming hardware can do, And this build proves that in every benchmark, every game, and every session I have put it through. It is not perfect, no build ever is, but it is as close to perfect as the current hardware generation allows. Everything is in the description below, including the full parts list with pricing and direct links. Go build something great. The parts list covers every single component with full specifications and where to find the best current pricing. Whether you are planning to replicate this build exactly or use it as a reference point for your own configuration, everything you need is right there. Drop any questions in the comments below and I will get back to you. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this. This is the best gaming PC I have ever put together, and I genuinely cannot wait